But in that BPS, if you assess it, there is gaps on where we are going to raise this money. Where our ordinary revenue cannot be able to help us raise that money, then it fundamentally means that we have to borrow. And when we have to borrow, this is the suggestion that then comes with the midterm debt management strategy. So ordinarily, what we are passing here, Mr. Speaker, forms a foundation for passing the BPS, because it forms a foundation for which, as a House and as Parliament, we can be able to take control over the limits with which the government can then go and borrow. And Mr. Speaker, this is not just my wisdom or the wisdom of the committee. It is also the wisdom of our laws, Mr. Speaker. You know that the PFM Act, the PFM Act Section 33, and I think it is Cap 412A, requires that we must actually be able to look at medium-term debt management strategy so that we can be able to come up with a legal framework for which the government must think about sustainable way of raising money. And not just sustainable way of raising money, but also to look at the debt portfolio, Mr. Speaker, in such a way that that debt portfolio is actually going to inform what goes to the BPS and what doesn't go to the BPS, in terms of physical discipline of government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I dare say, and I'm not a prophet of doom, that if we continue this mismanagement between the MDTS and the BPS, Mr. Speaker, we might wake up in the next financial year with another Gen Z protest, because we are going to be forced to have a debt management strategy in the middle of a crisis, and then we're going to start talking about fiscal consolidation. Mr. Speaker, this is not something that we must take lightly as a Parliament. And Parliament must actually, through what we have proposed here from the Finance Committee that I sit in, Mr. Speaker, Parliament must come back and take control of debt management in this country. It must come back and take control, Mr. Speaker. Because, Mr. Speaker, you and I are children of debt. We are born out of debt, Mr. Speaker. We are born out of debt to the extent that there are two processes that are going on here. There's a debt that we were born into as a country that we must manage. And then there is constrained physical space that the government of the day must run the government, that then they must go into public borrowing, Mr. Speaker. If we don't participate in that process, Mr. Speaker, it becomes a problem. But I'm proud of this Senate, Mr. Speaker, because immediately when we came to this Senate, Mr. Speaker, we decided to review the PFM Act so that we could come up with what the sustainability in terms of our debt management looks like. And Mr. Speaker, remember, we passed a law in this House that directed the National Treasury that if you are going to be able to borrow, we must first of all look at our debt portfolio and make sure that the present value to GDP of our debt does not go beyond 55%. That's what we passed in this House, Mr. Speaker. But what has happened between June last year and today? Mr. Speaker, between June last year and today, our debt bumped to 10.58 trillion, which, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the present value to GDP ratio as per now, Mr. Speaker, we are at 63%. And Mr. Speaker, some theorists in the National Treasury might come and argue that it's not possible to actually achieve a 55% presence value to GDP ratio of our debt stock, Mr. Speaker, because of some numbers that they keep on bringing to this House in the BPS, Mr. Speaker, and they say that they're projecting that is a target that can only be met in 2028, 2029, Mr. Speaker. I am not persuaded with this, Mr. Speaker, because I am a student of Kibaki's free primary school education, Mr. Speaker. And during Kibaki's time, Mr. Speaker, I never even knew that I would even become anything close to a member of parliament in this country, Mr. Speaker. But at that time, Mr. Speaker, the present value to GDP ratio, Mr. Speaker, of our debt stock was at a whooping 2%. It was 2%, Mr. Speaker, meaning that there's something that has become rogue in this country, where the debt of this country, Mr. Speaker, is not spent on development. The debt of this country, Mr. Speaker, is spent in the mouth of individuals. It is spent in the mouth of people in power, Mr. Speaker, so that the money that we are borrowing, Mr. Speaker, never get anything done, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, how comes that in a BPS that is being proposed now, we are proposing to raise a variety of money, Mr. Speaker, to 4.3 trillion, and then, Mr. Speaker, we want to burden the country again, that out of that 4.3 trillion, Mr. Speaker, the cost of our debt, that means that the money that we'll be paying out of that, money raised, Mr. Speaker, is going to be 1.97 trillion. That means basically, if you round off that number, we are going to be paying 2 trillion. We raised 4.3 trillion, Mr. Speaker, to pay 2 trillion in debt, Mr. Speaker. Are we slaves in our own country? And are we fine being slaves in our own country, Mr. Speaker? When we have got a PFM, Mr. Speaker, that has actually guided us, that in structuring our debt in this country, Mr. Speaker, we must also be able to look at how do we make our domestic debt market, sustainable, Mr. Speaker. The same way Honorable Senator Mungatana has indicated that our domestic market, Mr. Speaker, is currently depressed. It is bleeding. It is hemorrhaging, Mr. Speaker. The domestic debt market is completely unsustainable, Mr. Speaker. Last year, Mr. Speaker, I was the same Finance and Budget Committee when we did propose that the only reason why we'll pass a BPS in this house is if the Treasury will help the country go to a 50%, 50-50 situation whereby the domestic debt will be 50% and the foreign market will be the external market, Mr. Speaker, will take the other 50%. What happened, Mr. Speaker? On the report that we have had now, Mr. Speaker, we have 30-70. 30% external, 70% domestic. Then what are we doing as a house? Why then do we sit and restructure debt, Mr. Speaker, and recommend certain numbers that can be able to allow that we don't face crowding out of our businesses, Mr. Speaker? Because, Mr. Speaker, what happens is the government has realized that the domestic market, despite the fact that it's the most expensive compared to the external market, Mr. Speaker, it is a very easy capital to come by. It's a very easy capital to get your hands into. And it's a very easy money to come from Equity Bank, or to come from KCB, or to come from Family Bank, and then go to Central Bank. And because there's no automation, Mr. Speaker, you can quickly get your hands in some monies here and there, and it gets lost somewhere, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, how is this possible? If you are coming here, Mr. Speaker, with a proposal, because if you look at the report that we have here, Mr. Speaker, we are being told as a parliament that we be comfortable that our gross, let me just get it, Mr. Speaker, because I don't want to say things that don't exist, because this is what has been proposed here, Mr. Speaker, that we be comfortable with a gross financing of a ratio of 25 to 75. That means that 25 is going to the external market and 75 to the domestic borrowing market. Mr. Speaker, last year we said that gross borrowing must be 50%. How is it being proposed that now it has to be 75%? And Mr. Speaker, if you go to the net borrowing, the net financing strategy is 35 to 65%. Meaning that where Parliament has become comfortable in terms of becoming a rubber stamp in this process, because that's what we have become. We are a mere rubber stamp in this process of budget making, Mr. Speaker. Where we have become comfortable that we are a rubber stamp, the executive also becomes comfortable that, wait a minute, we can increase this domestic debt borrowing. Because it's easy money, it's quick money to get. We can just keep on increasing it, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, when you increase this domestic public borrowing, Mr. Speaker, what you are doing is that today you are killing Keroche breweries. Today, Mr. Speaker, it's not possible for Keroche to borrow and compete with government, because the government borrowing is going to be lucrative for the commercial banks as possible, Mr. Speaker. Today, you are killing barter. Today, you are killing Safaricom. Today, you are choosing to kill all the business that I see thriving in this economy, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we have actually seen a number of our businesses closing down because out of this borrowing, and you want to raise a bigger deficit of about 900 billion, Mr. Speaker, which again has increased from 700 billion last year. What you are doing also is that as you increase the cost of borrowing in this country, Mr. Speaker, and the risk associated with it in the domestic market, what you are also doing, you are increasing taxes on these businesses. You are increasing taxes on these businesses, Mr. Speaker. The corporate tax, the income tax, and all the taxes that are going on in this country, Mr. Speaker, are making it virtually impossible even to think about a startup nation, Mr. Speaker. Businesses that could easily attract $500 million, Mr. Speaker, cannot get those monies in our economy today. Reason being, the structure of debt is not possible to get money to finance them in our economy. Our economy also, if it comes to startup market, Mr. Speaker, we don't have a thriving venture capitalist who can be able to actually backstop this idea of lack of credit in our commercial business, Mr. Speaker. Once you have credit, you know, Mr. Speaker, if you're in the US, I know people are arguing that there is no country that doesn't borrow. Yes, even the US borrows. That is true. The US has got debt, China borrows, other countries borrow. But the first thing, Mr. Speaker, is that when they borrow on their currency. So that the US is comfortable with their debt. If the worst will happen, the US will simply print their money and be able to pay. But as when we borrow, we peg it to the dollar, Mr. Speaker. When we peg it to the dollar, any adjustments in the global market, Mr. Speaker, do affect us. Any adjustment in the global market economy, Mr. Speaker, do affect us. So our debt will continue piling and piling, Mr. Speaker, to the extent that if we approved what the Treasury is asking us to approve without juxtaposing it with the BPS, Mr. Speaker, what will happen is that by June of this year, Mr. Speaker, we will have a debt stock of 11.07 trillion. Mr. Speaker, you haven't even paid what you're born of. And I can see you, Mr. Speaker, when I look at you, you already have gray hair, Mr. Speaker. And you haven't paid the debt that you were born and found. Yet, in another 3 months, your debt stock as a country is going to 11.07 trillion, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, let me remind you that even this number is not factual. It's not a number that you can be comfortable defending. This is a number that we are given by the Treasury to defend its proposed ratio for borrowing, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Okech, what is the relationship between my gray hair and the debt management?
That's a good question, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the relationship is very simple. Since you are born up to now, you are almost going towards your old age, Mr. Speaker. You have been paying a lot of debt in this country that you don't understand, haven't helped you. And Mr. Speaker, I see you working very hard. Every day you are in this house, Mr. Speaker, to work for the nation. You are earning meager income, Mr. Speaker, which again, 50% of it must go to pay debt. And now I'm imagining, what will your children remain with? You have worked as a donkey for this country and you have paid everything. But now, what is going to happen to your children when you wake up in June and they have got 11.07 trillion worth of debt? This is what I'm crying, Mr. Speaker. I'm sympathizing with you. I'm empathizing with you, Mr. Speaker. And I hope that as a house, you will see how serious this thing is affecting us to the extent that we must take control over the debt management process, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, one thing that we must also insist in as a house, Mr. Speaker, the next time the National Treasury comes here, before we consider the BPS, Mr. Speaker, they must give us a scientific rationale of where they are coming up with these debt numbers, Mr. Speaker. Because, Mr. Speaker, these debt numbers, if you go to the National Treasury, Mr. Speaker, they have got a different figure from the control of budget. They have got a different figure from the Auditor General. They have got a different figure from the Central Bank. Who is telling us the truth, Mr. Speaker? And as I've told you, that entire debt stock, Mr. Speaker, when it was borrowed, you are not explained to what it was going to do. When it's now being consumed, you are not told what it was going to do, Mr. Speaker. I remember in the former regime, Mr. Speaker, when there was a deficit of about 500 billion, Mr. Speaker, When it came, and from the Auditor General report, Mr. Speaker, when you follow the 500 billion, Mr. Speaker, it was committed to infrastructure in one region, Mr. Speaker. How do you borrow 500 billion and then commit it in one region on infrastructure, Mr. Speaker? How is it fair? And that concept of that infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, Migori, where I come from, does not consume that infrastructure. I empathize with the Senator of Kisii because he's always the most vocal about debt issues. Where he comes from, I did not see that money working in Kisii, Mr. Speaker. I didn't see that money in Turkana, Mr. Speaker. I didn't see that money in Mandera, Mr. Speaker. Yet the child from Mandera, Mr. Speaker, even Mr. Speaker, in where you come from in Meru, I looked at those numbers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I didn't see that money in Meru. It was not there, 500 billion. And Mr. Speaker, today, when it comes to paying it, all of us must participate. And not just participate, it is equal distribution, Mr. Speaker. I pay the same amount of debt as the person from Tana River, Mr. Speaker, who when you go, Mr. Speaker, they are laboring in backbreaking dust every single day, riding border borders to make a living, Mr. Speaker. Then out of that dust, they must then pay tax, Mr. Speaker. Out of that tax, Mr. Speaker, they must pay equal amount of money as other regions that have benefited from this debt, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we must take control. We must not leave this debt management conversation to the Treasury, Mr. Speaker. We must take full control, and I'm very proud of our members of the Finance and Budget because they have been very engaged, and Mr. Speaker, you have seen them staying in this house as much as they can to be able to contribute in this house. I've seen Senator Ali Roba, Mr. Speaker, the chair of the Finance and Budget Committee, staying in this house till late hours, Mr. Speaker, to give you a snippet of what is happening in this country, Mr. Speaker. I've seen the Vice Chair, Madam and Senator Tabitha, Mr. Speaker, staying in this house till late hours, Mr. Speaker, so that she can give you just an idea of what we are struggling with in the Finance and Budget Committee, Mr. Speaker, to make sense to the CS of Finance, Mr. Speaker. I have seen Senator Boni Aluale staying in this house, Mr. Speaker, to give you just an idea of why we must manage this debt, so that my fellow countrymen, people from Kuria, people from Masangora in Kuria, Mr. Speaker, people from Isibania in Kuria, people from Komosoko Nyamosenza in Kuria, Mr. Speaker, people from Makalda, who do not understand this burden, why it must come to them, Mr. Speaker, can get reprieve. And Mr. Speaker, I hope that even as we pass this MDDS, Mr. Speaker, the recommendation that have been forwarded by this amazing Finance and Budget Committee, Mr. Speaker, will not go to vain, Mr. Speaker. We will not be confronted with the next MDTS, Mr. Speaker, that is brought to us on the basis of our recommendations that were never adhered to, Mr. Speaker. We cannot recommend that you go down on domestic borrowing, Mr. Speaker. We cannot recommend that the government goes down on, fiscal deficit that they have to bring it down, Mr. Speaker. Then the next year we are confronted with an increased fiscal deficit. Then we are confronted with an increased borrowing domestically without the Parliament having known that increased under our watch, Mr. Speaker. That must stop, as I support the Finance and Budget Committee, Mr. Speaker, for coming with this, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute on this particular motion. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well spoken. Senator Onyong Kalichan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I would like to really commend my colleagues who have really articulated this issue as openly and as sincerely as we've been talking about it. I want to thank Honorable Uhuru Odinga for acknowledging that even when the model of PPP has been accepted as the modus operandi of how we are going to run our projects in terms of investments and all that we are supposed to do, that even when the PPP issue has been a hot topic in Kenya, that, Mr. Speaker, my hope and wish is that, yes, let us adopt the PPP model, but let us make sure that we are transparent, accountable, fair, and equitable in trying to distribute the resources of our country. Number two, I want to thank my colleague, my young Senator Eddie Okech, one of the very able individuals in this House who has contributed quite a bit, and I sit with him in the Finance Committee, and I'm proud of him, and I'm happy the issues he has raised are quite substantive, and many people may not see them. My leader, my friend, my brother, Honorable Okiya Omtata, Kenya will vindicate you. You have consistently raised these issues even before I came to the Senate. Some of us did not understand the weightiness and the importance of raising this issue. Senator Omtata, thank you for noticing that we need to separate the central bank and the treasury from the executive. That is, in fact, one of the challenges that we are going to face as a committee, and we are going to interrogate this. I also want to give credit to my brother, Honorable Mungatana. Thank you, sir. Your experience and time enables you to analyze these issues passionately. I believe that what you have discussed will make Kenya a better place. Mr. Speaker, the public debt management issue in our country is at a crisis level. The reason why I say this is because, Mr. Speaker, we have been looking, analyzing, discussing what is the cost of our debt? Why do we borrow so much money? Why is it that we, in the last 10 years, close to 12 years, we've actually increased our debt by 100%? When President Kibaki was President of the Republic of Kenya, our debt was, by the time he was living, 1.1 trillion shillings. After that period, and you look at where we are right now, our debt is close to 12 trillion. And the question that you ask when you sit in this House, what is it that we need to do to make sure that this exercise, which I personally call an exercise in futility, where we are borrowing excessively, where in fact we are borrowing domestically, Mr. Speaker, where the interest rates at which we are borrowing government money, state funds, you are now at about, some of the banks are giving us money at 12%, 16%. I am told one of the loans was borrowed at 18%. And yet, Mr. Speaker, you know that we can borrow money globally at the cost of 2%. We can actually reschedule Kenya's debts. All of them, all our debts can be rescheduled. We can go to the international money market. We can borrow at interest rates between 2 and 4%. And we can pay out all our debt, stock of debt, and make sure we begin afresh. These are the issues that I would want the committee to look at, and I would want this House to look at. Number two, Mr. Speaker, there was a basic operating standard procedure on how we used our borrowed money. What did we do, Mr. Speaker? The money would come. Normally, the rates at which we borrowed was at 30-70, like Senator Eddie said. Domestically, we would borrow at 30%, because when you borrow domestically, then for the ordinary business person or the ordinary Kenyan, borrowing in commercial banks becomes more expensive, and the banks do not want to lend to ordinary business people. Why? Because of the cost of risk. The risk of where a commercial enterprise might borrow money and not deliver. So what happens is that commercial banks prefer when bills, bonds, and stocks is what they trade in, and the government is very comfortable at that. Why? I'm sure my brother Eddie and many other leaders here have talked about it. When you go and negotiate with a commercial bank and you are borrowing 1 trillion shillings, and this commercial bank is actually giving you this money at a certain percentage, information and data gets to us where people in government will go and negotiate with some of these commercial banks, and they will even enable these commercial banks, after they have borrowed money for the government, to allow the commercial bank to do overnight lending, where interest rates are delivered, are earned, and we never discussed these issues openly until recently when Okiya Omtata started discussing it. Why do we borrow? Mr. Speaker, we borrow because sometimes our budget has got gaps. Previously, the Kenyan government position, if you look at when Saitoti was the Minister for Finance, come up to President Kibaki and move on, you will realize that we were borrowing when we would need a stopgap measure where we would borrow most probably 5% or whatever that the balance was, and then our budget would be balanced, and we would keep on moving as the economy was growing. What happened? Now we borrow for big projects. We borrow for those projects where billions and billions, not Kenyan shillings, billions and billions, Mr. Speaker, of American dollar funding is what we are dealing with. As a result, the money that was supposed to deal with the basic issues of our governance, basic issues of our very existence. How do we handle the health sector? How we are handling our education? How are we handling our agriculture? The very basic sectors of our economy that are meant to deliver for the Kenyan public. We then decide, no, we are going to take this money and do these big-time projects. Why? Because the big-time projects is where we get our kickbacks. That is where we generate our revenue by arguing and saying, no. You don't have to spend any money in farming. Look for something big that you can do so that then that is where the money is shared, and that is where we really don't even have to work very hard about this. Why? Because even if we borrow, we'll be able to pay this money anyway. The problem we have, soon, we are not going to be able to pay this money because we are at 68%. If by next year we are going to borrow another 1.2 trillion like we did last year, the reality is soon we are going to be at 90%, and then after that Kenya will just become like Thailand. We will not pay our debts back. We will not be able to pay salaries. The economy will just become an economy. It will become a supermarket. Essentially, what does a supermarket do? We become consumers. Then you don't have to worry about agricultural development and growth. You don't have to worry about your health sector. In fact, we as a people will then now begin thinking about, are we taking our patients to Rwanda, which is a country that is operating their health facilities better than ours? Or are we going to educate our children in Rwanda, where the kids are going to school, achieving the grades they want? The educational sector is actually teaching mathematics. And what do we do in our country? We are now saying we don't even have to allow kids to learn maths. Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a passionate plea to my colleagues in this House. The responsibility of fixing the mess we are in falls particularly on this House. Our country has a problem. We are not able to transform this country from a low-level, middle, low-income, developing country into a mid-level, upper-level developing country. We are slowly going to go back to where we used to be, an underdeveloped country. A country that depends on its revenues so that it can govern itself on a daily basis. We are not going to be a country that invests on those sectors that are going to change the livelihoods of our people. We are not a country that is willing to tackle the issues that are important. We must make the central bank to be independent. We must make the treasury to become advisory, so that the treasury's responsibility is to advise the president on what the economic issues are on a micro basis and on a macro basis. What do we do with interest rates? What are we doing with investments and savings? Why is investment in Kenya becoming a problem? Why are countries moving out? Because once companies move out of your country and they go and invest somewhere, then you have lesser of your people getting jobs, then you have lesser of your people generating revenue for themselves, and you have lesser of the government taking taxes, and you cannot continue taxing people indefinitely. Mr. Speaker, many of my colleagues have brought wonderful issues in this place. In this House, I am so happy with what is being discussed. We must make sure that we are able to make sure that the public debt management system is linked to the IFMI system. It is also linked to the own source revenue systems. How can you have a financial platform in your country that only deliberately has been cut into sections and bits and pieces because it makes it easier for those who are cutting deals and making money out of these state resources to do it without it looking seamless? And yet in reality, we are not seamlessly managing our debt and revenues, and yet we are seamlessly managing the stealing of those revenues and the resources. Mr. Speaker, I would like to insist that yes, the automation must be done on even how the withdrawals of payments for the repayment of the debts that we have. And yes, like Senator Eddie Okech has said, why don't we know what the debt stock in our republic is? You have the Auditor General giving you a different figure. You have the Controller of Budget giving you a different figure. You have the Budget Committee, the Finance Committee, when we were sitting the other day, the figure we are having of 12 trillion. Me, I believe that our debt right now is at about 14 trillion. Can we get this committee, the Finance Committee and this House, to make sure that all those 4 institutions are called and we are able to, even if it means, Madam Speaker, we are able to get a forensic audit to be done so that historically we can even know how much money we borrowed, where did the money go, who spent that money, all the Eurobonds we have gotten, how much money has been used to pay debt as we speak. And you know what is very interesting, Madam Speaker? Even when we are paying the debts, our debt never goes down. How can you pay 800 billion of debt every year and yet the debt which you have of 12 trillion never goes down? It means the debts are actually not being paid. It means money is being siphoned off from the international money market, and we are told that this was collected so that we can go and pay our debts, and yet in reality, Madam Speaker, what actually happens is that this money cannot be accounted for by any of our institutions that we have set up to guard what is happening in our country in terms of financial management. So, Madam Speaker, I would like to really plead with the committee and members of this House, and I can see we are now slowly beginning to have a critical mass. Let us make sure that we know how much we are borrowing. Let us make sure we know where the money goes. Let us make sure what we can do. Let us, in the process of achieving this, let us make sure that whatever money that we borrow is utilized fairly, equitably amongst all our counties. And let us make sure, Madam Speaker, that Kenyans begin to trust government. If we don't have an open government, even if the head of state sings from morning till evening, begging Kenyans to raise taxes for him, they will refuse. Why? Because they feel that we are not being open enough and we are not telling them the truth as to what is happening to their money and what is happening to the money that is borrowed for development for our country. Madam Speaker, I would like to say another issue. I have watched what is happening in our country, and I've seen this for quite a long time. And the reason is I've been around for a while. Unless we change the way we behave, unless we change the strategies that we use, unless we change the socio-political, economic behavior as leadership, we are taking our country in the wrong direction. Why do I say so? We have a country. You expect what runs the economy of this country is the private sector. The private sector, the small businesses, the big businesses, the mix between MDGs, all these groups, when you put them together, that is the engine that is supposed to drive our economy. But you see, Madam Speaker, right now in Kenya, our economy is being driven by the national government. That is why everybody wants business in government. That is why everybody wants to do deals in government. That is why any transaction you see, everybody would want to own a piece of land owned by government. Everybody would want to have every single transaction we are conducting today is actually about government. How I plead with my colleagues here that we change that to the point where we agree that the private sector is going to be the driver, is going to be the engine that is going to change the country, the direction it's going. That we have an economy that grows, the cake becomes bigger, we are responsible how we use our donor funds, we are responsible how we use all the money that we borrow, and we are responsible how we use the taxes that we collect from Kenyans. And Madam Speaker, my honest observation and honest feeling is that we are failing on all those gaps. And therefore, I would like to say that what works, let us follow it up. Let us make sure that our GDP ratio to debt and to borrowing should come down to 50-50. And let us make sure that when we borrow funds, we borrow externally, because money is cheaper at the international money market. We can go 70-30 as we have always been. And I had Honorable Uhuru Odinga mention, and it's true because of the institutional memory. He was in the treasury. There was a time when the Kenyan government borrowed any money, Madam Speaker. 30% of that money was grants. 70% is what we paid. And the loans were concessional, the loans were long-term, the loans were very soft. That is how you change and develop the development areas in our sectors. Madam Speaker, I would like to finally say that there has been this argument historically, which started about 10 years ago, that all the money we get, whether we borrow it or domestically, what we want to do is make sure that we actually use this money to do mega projects, where you want to spend 500 billion, where you want to spend 150 billion. Madam Speaker, Kenya just needs for us to fix the health sector, fix the education sector, make sure that we fix the basic roads. Basic roads. Make sure that there is an ease to do business. Make sure that the Kenyan public appreciates that our education is running well, that we are funding university students well, that the primary school must... Why can't we give free education, Madam Speaker, to our poor people in this country? Why? Because Kibaki did it. He was using 72 billion to take primary, secondary, and university students for free education. Right now, the Ministry of Education is given 640 billion shillings. And we can't give our children free education? And we borrow this money? We are spending 640 billion shillings for the education sector. And we are not able to give free education to our students. And you hear all these things about who prints books, where the money is going. I mean, Madam Speaker, for us to fix our country, yes, this House can come up with the recommendation. But unless we have structures and institutions that are going to be the defense mechanism we use about our bad behavior, we will not go anywhere. Why? Because, Honorable Mutata, you notice every single time in our republic, at least, I'm so happy it's been like nearly a week that you have not seen a scandal. There is scandal after scandal after scandal about public money. Can we stop the abuse, the misuse, the wastage of public funds so that we serve the Kenyan public with the dignity they deserve, so that we can leave a country that is better than we found it? And my worry is, many of us may not see the contradiction of where we are. We are a country that has got a budget that can run between 6 to 7 countries within the East and Central African region. What we have as a budget can run those 7 countries. But if you take the population we have of 50 million, all these countries I'm mentioning, there are 6 or 7, their population is 300 million. How come we are not able to use the resources that we have to fix the mess we are in? And that is why I keep saying, we don't need to borrow. The money we have, in fact, is enough. All right? Why is the money not enough? We keep on having ghost workers. We employ teachers. We don't know who owns the...
Time up, Senator. Thank you. Okay, half a minute. You finish the sentence.
Yes. I just wanted to say, let us make sure there is open government, transparent government, where we are accountable to each other, where we manage the resources of our country with prudence and respect, and Kenyans will be always happy that we were in this House. And I really hope that this House And particularly, this House and the Budget Committee will stand up and stand for the Kenyans. Madam Speaker, thank you. With all those many remarks, I second the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Okoitandru Mutata, Busia County.
Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this very important debate. I will begin by referring to the Constitution, which is my Bible or my Quran on matters governance. Article 220 of the Constitution provides for how our budgets have to be made, their content, timing, and form. And within that particular section, it's clearly stated that our debts must be contained in the budgets, in the annual budgets that are made. The proposals to borrow and where money is to be borrowed from should be in the budget that comes to the Parliament every year. Now, contrary to that, Parliament has done something very strange and totally unconstitutional in this country by enacting something called the debt ceiling in the Public Finance Management Act. The debt ceiling, the concept of a debt ceiling has got a history. Before 1917, in the USA, Congress used to approve every debt that was borrowed by the Treasury for the executive in America, in the USA. In 2017, when the USA joined the First World War, Congress began the idea of allowing the Treasury to borrow on a need. And that morphed into the culture where they began the so-called debt ceiling in an attempt to contain the appetite for money by the executive. And up to now, you even have the Debt Act that was passed under Obama trying to address these issues. They have not done very well. So we have gone ahead and borrowed the idea of a debt ceiling from the Americans who did it out of an emergency situation and failed to go back to the default that they used to have, where Congress approved every debt. And now we are trying to peg our debt on GDP. First of all, it doesn't make any sense, any common sense, to peg a debt on GDP when you know that GDP is the collective, the totality of the productivity of a state as estimated per year. And yet you repay debt, not from your percentage of GDP, you repay debt from your taxes. Debt must be tied to the capacity to raise taxes to pay them. And that's why in Article 220, there is a requirement that Parliament, in every budget that the executive proposes, in Article 221C, it says, 1B, first of all, it says, budgets of the national and county governments shall contain proposals for financing any anticipated deficit for the period to which they apply. C, proposals regarding borrowing and other forms of public liability that will increase public debt during the following year. Now, when you look at our budget, Parliament always passes a balanced budget that conforms to those two provisions. That budget is contained in the appropriation bill. And each appropriation bill is what gives us the legitimate debt within the Republic of Kenya. Now, I've taken my time to examine our appropriation bills from 2017 to 2025 and established that Parliament only approved 2 trillion, has only approved 2 trillion 791 billion 543 million 336,707 shillings. Yet, when you examine the debt register published by the Treasury, you find that we have borrowed 8 trillion 918 billion 21 million 659,782 shillings, which means we have borrowed 6 trillion 950,163 billion 6 trillion 950 billion 163 million 132,328 shillings outside the law. Other than that, we have also seen the other activity that happened the other day. We were told that the Eurobond had matured and the government required to borrow extra money from the Eurobond market to offset what had become due. And they borrowed quite a bit of money. Yet, the Constitution in Article 214 states categorically that the public debt is a direct charge on the consolidated fund. The Public Finance Management Act 2 and the regulations forbid borrowing money to pay another debt, borrowing money to pay a debt. So why does the government get powers to do these kind of things? And I'm in particular referring to Section 15, 2, C, and 50 clause 3 of the Public Finance Management Act. When we borrow money against the law, what are we trying to achieve? What evidence is there that the debt for the Eurobond had not been paid off as required by law automatically as a direct charge to the consolidated fund, that we had to go borrowing further money for it? Madam Speaker, as I proceed to submit, I also want to observe that of the odious debt that I've referred to, 4 trillion 605 billion 840 million 287,992 shillings was incurred in the period 2014 to 2022 when President Uhuru Kenyatta was in charge. Under President Ruto, that's from 2022 when he took over, already 2 trillion 250 billion 325 million 905,200 shillings has been taken outside the law. We have a program-based budgeting process whereby when money is borrowed, it's tied to a project. These trillions of shillings, more than 6 trillion, cannot be traced in government documents. I've taken my time from October last year, poring over thousands of documents that I got from the websites of the Treasury, Central Bank, Control of Budget, and all these people. And I cannot trace where this money went. I can see why the 2-point-something trillion that the Parliament approved is clearly seen where it went. This money cannot be traced in the economy. To make matters worse, Madam Speaker, not a single domestic debt is approved by Parliament. Not a single one. All those billions. Look at the Appropriation Act. There's none. It's somehow that the Executive does not implement the budget. Because when you look at the statement of annual revenue and actual revenue and net expenditure, which is published monthly, at the end of every month, the statement of actual revenue and net expenditure. That's why you encounter this animal called the domestic debt. If you look at the budget, there's no domestic debt. Treasury bonds, treasury bills are a legitimate form of, treasury bills are supposed to act like an overdraft. Where there's a delay by the treasury, by the KRA to submit enough money to government, the government should issue treasury bills to fill up the gap, but the treasury bills by law must be paid within 12 months. They cannot become a debt. Now, under the Public Finance Management Act, all borrowing must support a capital project, a development project which is defined. But you find that we are borrowing a lot of money on the domestic market without approval of Parliament. Where does this money go when it is not even budgeted for? Why are we borrowing this money? And it's running in billions of shillings. Madam Speaker, I wish our screens were working. I would have beamed my calculations onto that screen so that Kenyans can see how they are being scammed in the name of taking public debt. I've done a graph, and you realize one of the interesting things is that our debt spikes every time we have got a handshake. Well, which means that the mechanisms of oversight are lost. In every year when you have had a handshake, there has been a spike in reckless borrowing and reckless expenditure by government. I hope it doesn't happen today. It's just unfortunate that we cannot, I don't know whether we are allowed or not, but I would have loved to be projecting some of these figures on these screens that we have here, so that all Kenyans can see exactly how we are being messed up, how we are being hurt. And another painful thing is that the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, which is all over demanding more powers and all that of you, has never audited our debt portfolio. I don't understand why they cannot just let the police, the economic crimes unit of the CID, do their work. The ESCC has never audited our debt. You find again, one of the things that has made our debt shoot up from 2014 is that Parliament amended the Public Finance Management Act to allow for money borrowed to be kept offshore, contrary to Article 206, which requires that all money borrowed must be kept in the consolidated fund. So they amended that, and at the discretion of the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury, they can borrow money and keep offshore. And that's one of the things that is really affecting us. When you look at the total amount of debt that we have borrowed, many people discuss it in terms of the actual figures borrowed. But if you factor in, Madam Speaker, you factor in the cost of the loans, and you factor in the interest on the loans, you get a shocking figure. Right now, we are standing at 18 trillion shillings when you take those factors in. Totally unsustainable for us. And I think in the last payment I've seen in this statement, and the projections of paying 1.7 trillion, 2.7 trillion in debt and what have you, those kind of projections are not good for this country. They are existential threats to this country. You cannot have a budget of, say, 3.7 trillion and spend 1.7 trillion repaying debt, and only 700 billion of the 1.7 trillion goes to paying off the principal, and 1 trillion goes to paying interest. That cannot work. It's going to sink this country. Another issue, Madam Speaker, that I would like to speak to is another form of debt that is not necessarily public debt, but it's a debt to the public in the name of pending bills. Spending bills, Madam Speaker, are a major scam. And the scam masters have convinced everybody in this country that we abandon cash-based accounting, we go to accrual accounting. Arrant nonsense. How do you do that? When you implement a budget, and a budget is an act of parliament, a budget is a law, or a budget is an act of a county assembly, it's a law. How do you accrue from one law to another law without referring back to parliament? How do you carry a debt from year 1 to year 2, when year 1, parliament said, or the National County Assembly said, we are giving you this budget, we are giving you this power to collect funds, you should deal with that case. And you have been given the capacity to do an appropriation bill, an appropriation a supplementary budget, where emergencies occur that you may not have foreseen. So this drive that we are going to go to accrual accounting, when governments are run on a cash basis, special hours, and it's anchored in the Constitution, is another monster that is going to eat up this country. And we need to look it in the face and say, how do you achieve that? Because the people from this pack or whatever, these accountants, have come and they are hollering all over that that's what happens in the private sector. Who tells them that you can run a government like a private sector account? We implement budgets, which are laws. So I don't see a mechanism of accruing an issue from one budget to another budget without going back to parliament. I know that dispensations, there are countries which run on accrual basis. But it's not in their law. It's not in their constitution. A unique feature of Kenya's constitution that we have got chapter 12 on public finance, which tries to cure mischief that has happened in this country since independence, whereby public coffers have never been respected. That's why we have that purely technical chapter in our constitution prescribing what should be done. So when we move away from that and say, so and so does it, so and so does it, so and so the majority are doing it, but what is in their constitution? Is it like ours? Why did we put it in our constitution? What are we trying to cure? So, Madam Speaker, I pray that this House, and I'm aware that this House even made some very grievous decision, it passed a motion saying that pending bills will be a first charge on the county revenue fund. And the logic, they said, okay, Article 14 of the 214 of the Constitution, Article 214 of the Constitution justifies or states that a public debt is a first charge on the consolidated fund. But they read 214 part 1. They did not read part 2, which then defines what is a public debt. Part 2 of 214 defines a public debt to be loans, guarantees for loans, and expenses incurred and related matters to loans. A pending bill where a county government has taken MCAs on a baseline study and they incur money and they can't pay, how does that become a public debt? Or you have contracted somebody to build a road and you don't pay him, you divert money to pay somebody else. How does that become a public debt? How does that become a first charge on the county revenue fund? Madam Speaker, we need to get serious, and I'm requesting that this parliament sets up induction courses for members of parliament on the Constitution of Kenya, and especially on Chapter 12, so that we can fully comprehend as a House what the architecture for handling public finances is, and then going forward, we'll be able to engage effectively and according to the book. With those few remarks, Madam Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity, and I don't support the recommendations made because they are unconstitutional. But I know I might be the only voice, but it doesn't matter when I'm the only voice. I don't support them. They are totally unconstitutional, and they should go back and have a reference to the Constitution. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Koitom Omutata. Senator Matthew John Muhia, Nyandarua County.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. And I want to encourage Senator Omutata, Senator Andrew Okia Omutata. You're not the only voice, because you are a voice that, just like Elijah Mwangale, the stone, it is your work to tell the stone. Whether the stone wants to listen, it is up to the stone. But you're not the only voice on this particular matter, especially on the recommendations that have been made by the Committee on Finance. I think I'm with you. I will not say that I support the recommendations that have been made by the Committee on Finance. More specifically, because I see them as a tap on the list of the government. They are just very moderate in terms of the recommendations that have been made on such a serious breach of the Constitution of the Republic of Kenya. They never want to go for the jugular. They don't want to say, and as it is, Honorable Speaker, so therefore, Honorable Omutata, feel encouraged. It feels good to do the right thing. We have always been hand-tied in the past, and you know. But we feel good. If this is how you've been feeling for the time that you've been speaking freely, we feel very good that you are now able to speak very freely without any baggage of being threatened by anybody, that if you say this, this will happen. If you don't say this, that will happen. So we are now able to speak very freely. Honorable Speaker, we are staring at an extremely difficult and an extremely dangerous situation as a country, Honorable Speaker. And in fact, what we are staring at is a threat on the sovereignty of the Republic of Kenya. Because, Honorable Speaker, when our debt has grown to 11.2 trillion, regardless of the route, as has been spoken about by Senator Omutata, regardless of the route that you've used to arrive to 11.02 trillion of our national debt, Honorable Speaker, and looking at the amount of money that we as a country are expected to pay to service our debt, then it tells you that the sovereignty of this republic is actually at very, very great risk. And the actions that have been made and the actions that have been, the very deliberate actions that have been taken and steps that have been taken by the William Ruto administration, Honorable Speaker, they are putting this country in a hole that it will be extremely difficult for us to get out of this particular hole, Honorable Speaker. And let me say this, looking at all the recommendations and all the submissions that have been made by every person who actually, I've seen that there were like 7 or so bodies that gave the recommendations on this particular report, Honorable Speaker. None of them has rounded President William Ruto, because every one of us, including the members of that particular committee, they know that we are actually, or the country is not on the right trajectory. If by June 2025, Honorable Speaker, which is this year, by June of this year, our public public debt service will be at standing at 1.95 trillion. That will be almost half of the national budget, Honorable Speaker. Because if our budget for the next year will be standing at 4 trillion, Honorable Speaker, and we are spending 1.95 on our on servicing our national debt, Honorable Speaker, it tells you that for almost every 1 shilling that is collected, half of that money will be used for loans, Honorable Speaker. And the Senator Omutata has told you that, especially for the external loans that we get, they are meant or they are supposed to go to capital projects. I would also ask, like Senator Onyonka has asked, what is this hole that never fills, Honorable Speaker? If every year we are paying 1.95 trillion, how comes our national debt does not reduce? And we also would want to put to test, because part of the campaign promises by President William Ruto, he was saying, and if I was to quote him, watu wamekopa pesa wamekula pesa hii Kenya, watu wamekuwa wakikopa pesa wanapeleka mahali ingine, tukichukua hii serikali hatutakuwa tunakopa, serikali yetu tutaweka sawa sawa na tutarokota kodi. Lakini we need to put that statement to test, Honorable Speaker. In his first year, President Uhuru Kenyatta, since he was sworn in 2013 to 2014, September of 2013 to September of 2014, Uhuru Kenyatta had a debt or had accumulated a debt of 437 billion. What about our angel who was supposed to correct that particular problem? President William Ruto had accumulated a debt of, in his first 9 months, in his first 1 year, sorry, he had accumulated a debt of 1.2 trillion. And Honorable Speaker, we then need to ask ourselves, because we are not borrowing this money to, for any other person, we borrow this money for the people of Kenya. Is it that the quality of life of the people of Kenya has improved since President William Ruto came to power? At least for President Uhuru Kenyatta, when he came to power, maybe we can say that the 437 billion that he had accumulated in debts, Honorable Speaker, in his first year, he was able to make our secondary school education almost affordable and almost free, Honorable Speaker, and that is a fact. Then we need to then put to test this new administration of President William Ruto. How much has out of this 1.2 trillion, how much has gone to making the lives of the people of Kenya better in his first 1 year in office, Honorable Speaker? You all must appreciate, and we all must appreciate, in his first year of his presidency, the taxes went very high. And he was saying that we need to be very patriotic. We need to give as much as we can, and we need to press the pay slips as much as we can, so that we can be able to support the national government, so that we stop borrowing, and so that we can develop and we can grow our own country using our own money. He was saying that if you are able to spare a shilling or two from your payslip, a shilling or two in your taxes, then we shall be able to ensure that we can be able to have a balanced budget. What has happened 3 years later, Honorable Speaker? Now our deficit in our budget is now running to trillions of money. It's the first time that we are seeing this kind of a deficit in a budget, in a national budget, Honorable Speaker. And he's going on to borrow, and it is not that the quality of the life of the people of Kenya is getting better. If you are to put that statement to test, Honorable Speaker, you know that a board, just one board of gypsum, in 2022 when William Ruto became president, was costing 630 shillings. Now, 3 years into his presidency, it is costing more than 1,000 shillings, Honorable Speaker. University education, by the time William Ruto became president of this republic, Honorable Speaker, it was at least 44,000 per student every year, every academic year, Honorable Speaker. In his new university funding model, students are paying up to 240,000 for one student, one academic year, Honorable Speaker. He has made life extremely expensive, and it has become extremely difficult to be a Kenyan, Honorable Speaker. That is why you feel you hear every time, Honorable Speaker, most of you are saying that they want the freedom of the payslip because they cannot see what this money is. They cannot feel the impact of the money that they have added to the government in terms of taxes versus the services that they are getting from the government, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, we would have expected, and it is the general expectation of the people of Kenya, that in terms of service delivery, you are supposed to get better services when our national budgets are growing. If, for example, Honorable Speaker, I was to spend, by the time I became a member of parliament here, Honorable Speaker, I think I was paying about 2,700 for my health insurance. Now I think I'm paying about 37,000, according to the new arrangement that was brought by President William Ruto. If indeed I was to access health care, and I don't need to spend my own money again, I would feel that it was worth it. But what has happened? Our health system has collapsed, and you know it, Honorable Speaker. Every time you hear, you have Harambes, you are a member of parliament and you know it. People are suffering in the villages. You are paying more and you are suffering more. What has become of this country, Honorable Speaker? Why is William Ruto running down this country? Because we need to ask ourselves, why is he running down this country? We don't have any other country. He also wants to, even if he anyway, Honorable Speaker, these are difficult things, and I also want to quickly run to one person who gave his memoranda to this particular committee, and he said that we should try and reduce government wastage on or prudence in the way we use our national resources. Honorable Speaker, when President William Ruto came, he said that we are cutting on all wastages in government. In fact, we were told that austerity measures are setting in. We were told that, including in Parliament here, we were told that we have to reduce our foreign travels, we have to reduce our domestic travel. It has happened in Parliament. I'm told that, the way we travel now is not the same way we used to travel when we came in here. But what happens at the National Executive? Because that is also something that we need to test. Why is it that his budget his State House budget keeps growing every financial year? It's not that he has new members of staff. It's not that he has new services or he's getting more guests than he was getting so that he can increase his hospitality budget. What was it in State House that he found? Were the roofs leaking in State House that he had to make it? He had to spend billions of money in a country that people are suffering on very basic issues on health, Honorable Speaker. But he has the money to ensure that he can repair almost all state roads around the Republic, Honorable Speaker. How many can he sleep in, even within one financial year? Why can't he do them progressively? Why would he not then do the State House in Nairobi and leave the rest and do them progressively, Honorable Speaker? He is renovating a State House in Nyeri, renovating another State House in Bungoma, renovating the State House in Nakuru, renovating State House in Mombasa, renovating State House I don't know where. Why does he want to live like a king? And the people that he's leading, the people of Kenya, are suffering and they are sleeping hungry. What becomes, what Honorable Speaker, what joy does he gain in having the best parishu State House in Africa, in the region? He says that he wants the State House of Kenya to be the level of the White House of the United States, Honorable Speaker. Is he leading people who have as much quality of life as the people of the United States, Honorable Speaker? He runs down the health system of Kenya, then he wants to live like a king. Honorable Speaker, tell me, because you know it. As we work on on government, reducing government wastage, Honorable Speaker, tell me how and why it is important, and I would want my colleagues to tell me why it is important, that for every one project that has been commissioned, the President has to commission it 5 times. Tell me, Honorable Speaker, because the President was in Nairobi, why would he have to spend a lot of money? You saw the kind of entourage that he was moving with when he was commissioning projects in Nairobi. Tell me, Honorable Speaker, why it was extremely important for him to move in entourages of 50 SUVs, have mobilized people to come and clap for him.
Honorable Senator Matthew, I know you have very hearty contributions towards this motion, but I want to remind you of the provisions of the Standing Order 101 on the content of speech, because you are contributing to a report on debt management. But the way your contributions are going, you are debating around the person and the conduct of the President, and for which you then need to move a specific motion. So you should confine yourself to the relevance of what the report that you're contributing to, so that if that report in any manner then points to the fact that it's the President that is doing the budgets and not the Treasury, then you would move towards the line of argument you have taken. But under Standing Order 101, then you need to be cautious how you contribute towards this, so that it's not about the debate on the person of the President.
Honorable Speaker, I know you have a responsibility of protecting the President. He's your party leader and my party leader, for that matter. I'm just reading, I'm picking things straight from the report. I have actually gone to page 20. Page,
Are you picking something on that report?
Page that one. Just
let me have the report. Clerk, let me just have the report so that we are on the same page. What page was that you indicated?
I'm at page 30.
Page 30.
On let me get it, but it was the submission that was made by Mr. Ronyo Kevin. I'm just speaking on, and it is just a broad term. I'm saying, in one of the things that he proposed is reduction of government wastage. I am trying, in my argument, Honorable Speaker, to express my disappointment in terms of public wastage. I'm not saying that I'm discussing the conduct of the president. I'm not discussing the conduct of the president. President William Ruto is not State House. In fact, he is not the accounting officer of State House. The accounting officer of State House is the controller.
Yes, Senator Meadow, that's why I have guided you understanding Order 101, because when I look at page 30, I have not seen the mention of the president in any of those paragraphs.
And I have not mentioned him in any of my arguments. I'm saying, Honorable Speaker, and I don't know why you want to.
Do you need a review? Because you mentioned several times.
Okay, if it is
Please
wrong to...
Please confine yourself to the report here.
All right.
Thank you.
I know it's a bit uncomfortable, but you just have to bear with things as they are, and then we can be able to move very, very, very quickly. But more importantly, Honorable Speaker, that very good gentleman made that particular observation that we need to ensure that we reduce government wastage. And I was saying, Honorable Speaker, in my opinion, it is not the priority of the people of Kenya now to have the best state ranges and the best state, the best state house in the region. It may look beautiful. It may look, it is elegant. It is excellent. It is beautiful. But does it reflect the lives of the people of Kenya? Is it the same as to, the quality of the life of the people of Kenya, Honorable Speaker? Maybe finally, before there's a recommendation that has been made by the Committee on Finance that I think, to this extent, I would want to agree with. Automation of the withdrawal of the debt service payment from the consolidated fund, Honorable Speaker. You know, this debt, national debt, Honorable Speaker, has become an extremely opaque thing, Honorable Speaker. You're not able to tell how much we paid within what time. For the county debts, Honorable Speaker, which we call the pending bills, Honorable Speaker, you have a view, because they are managed to do the integrated financial management system, if Mr. Honorable Speaker. You're able to tell, this was the date, it was accrued this time, this is what has been done to this date, Honorable Speaker. Why can't we have the same, so that we can be able to follow, and we can be able to understand how our national debt is flowing, Honorable Speaker? We can be able to know, Honorable Speaker, exactly how this money that we have taken as national debt, Honorable Speaker, how it has been used, Honorable Speaker. And maybe finally, and that's where I was before you interrupted me. Then you can guide me on whether I'm discussing the conduct of the president. Why would the state be spending money, millions of money, so that the president can go and commission a project? Honorable Speaker, case on point, I'll give you an example. For 3 times, President William Ruto has been to Nyandarua. He commissioned one road called Dunyonjeru Geta Captain Road. On one instance, he commissioned it at the captain side. On another instance, he commissioned it at the Geta side, Honorable Speaker. I hear that he's coming next, I think in a week or 2, to commission it at the Geta side, Honorable Speaker. How are we spending our money? How do we say that Kenya is broke and we are spending millions of money just for commissioning projects, Honorable Speaker? Why did we never, ever even see, even for one time, President Kibaki, one of the most celebrated presidents of this republic, Honorable Speaker, on top of car saying that nimetenga, nimesema, nimefanya? Why can't the president just come quietly and commission a project that is complete? Why does he keep launching projects, and once he launches that project, he leaves, the contractor follows him? Now, Honorable Speaker, of all the things that he has promised in Nyandarua, he is coming to the promise again. And we are spending national money because he does not come around. For the president to be in any county, Honorable Speaker, it will require and it will spend a lot of money. Senator, I know the president has now new defenders.
You have a point of order?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, you know I understand where Senator Methu comes from. And Madam Speaker, you know, these are standing orders of this House are very clear. And one year attempting to rule on Madam Speaker, but I know that sometimes it makes it more substance when a senator raises it. Madam Speaker, 101 says, 101.1, neither the personal conduct of the president, nor the conduct of the speaker, or any other judge, nor the judicial conduct of any other person performing judicial functions, nor any conduct of the head of state or government, or the representative in Kenya of any friendly country, or the conduct of the holder of an office whose removal from such office is dependent upon a decision of the Senate, shall be referred to adversely. The word I was looking for here is adversely, except upon a specific substantive motion of which at least 3 days notice has to be given. Mr. Speaker, I find the senator for Nyandarua being adverse, because I am very interested in what he's saying. I'm interested when he says that the head of state has used millions of money going to launch projects in his area, which he hasn't used to launch projects in my area, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I would wish that he brings a substantive motion to this effect, because the MDTA is a very important part of conversation that we must be able to manage debt. This debate about MDDS, Madam Speaker, is not a debate on what the president is doing currently in launching the projects. While that is a matter of interest for Senator Methu, but he's being so adverse in it that I find it juicy, that I feel like he will execute it better when he brings a substantive motion,
Senator
so that
Eddie,
can know to participate.
Just before we get to 6:30, I'll be adding another 10 minutes to help us finalize this motion and have the reply by Senator Tabitha.
Yes, so Madam Speaker, what I'm saying is that Senator Methu is trying to be adverse in his conversation. I don't have a problem with him pinpointing about projects that are being launched here and there, but I think it needs a substantive discussion, because it is not relevant to the debt management strategy, but most importantly, because it's mentioning numbers, it's mentioning projects that are being launched, and they're not being launched in my area, Madam Speaker. I have got interest in that conversation, but then the standing orders requires a substantive motion, Madam Speaker. Therefore, I wish that you rule him out of order up until he brings a substantive motion on this conversation, Madam Speaker. I thank you.
Let me dispense with this point of order first. We have a point of order already given by Senator Eddie, and I'll dispense with it first. Senator Methu, you have heard the issue that has been raised under that point of order, and I had guided and given you a direction on it. So don't wade into that adverse mention of the person of the presidency until you bring a substantive motion and give a notice of 3 days. And so that we don't waste time, I'll give you a chance to finish your submissions, and then we'll proceed on. What's your point of order, Senator Methu? Senator Karongo Dangwa, you know you look the same lately. You walk too closely, so you really do look like real brothers.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity. You know, Madam Speaker, wonders will never cease to happen that it is Senator of Migori who is standing to defend President William Ruto on the floor of the House.
Senator,
my point of order.
Senator Dangwa, what's your point of order, and under which standing order?
Starting order 105, statement of facts.
Proceed.
It's very sad and I would want you to rule Senator of Migori out of order. Because, Madam Speaker, the standing
Senator
orders...
maintain your silence.
Yes,
the Speaker
please.
is in charge.
The standing orders...
If you deal with it, just maintain your silence so that he can be heard.
Because all we are doing, we are...
He's on his feet. Maintain your calm and cool.
All we are doing, Madam Speaker,
Proceed,
we are just
Senator.
interfering with the debates by Senator Methu. The standing orders are very clear. If there is an issue any senator would want to be either informed, either mentioned, there's request for statement. We cannot have the senator of Migori telling the senator of Nyandarua to tell him what the president is supposed to have done in Migori or not, Madam Speaker. It is the prerogative or the mandate of the senator here to request for a statement on the floor of the House and say the president has been launching programs in other counties and not launching in Migori. But do not defend the president here when the Senator Methu says that he has been launching programs who is not seeing and they are not free. Money is being used, people are being carjacked, people are having their bags taken, people are being stolen for. Madam Speaker, what I'm trying to say is rule him out of order.
Senator,
So that we can give the senator an opportunity, because he is discussing this MTDS, Madam Speaker, so that we have to understand why is Kenya or why is the government saying there is no money, yet there is misuse, Madam Speaker. The misuse is so much that we are even, Madam Speaker, telling our children we are going to give them chapati. We have finished all the development programs. The only thing that is remaining is chapati, Madam Speaker.
Senator Thangwa, I do not know where you are driving us into with that debate, because the question you're raising, Senator Methu, I've not given you the floor, so resume your seat. Senator Thangwa, the issue you are now raising is under Standing Order 105. Nobody has requested for facts. What Senator Eddy referred Senator Methu to was Standing Order 101 on the contents of speech, and when the person of the president is mentioned, an issue I had even given a guidance on, but Senator Methu still veered away from the directive of the Speaker, from the directions of the Speaker. So I want to once again rule your point of order. It's out of order, actually, because it did not respond to the issues, and it introduced an issue which the chair had dispensed with. So I will allow Senator Methu to proceed on with the submissions and to stick within the guidelines offered by the Speaker.
I don't know why Senator Tabitha is really eager to have me conclude, but Honorable Speaker, what should not be in the content of my speech is the conduct of the President. And the dictionary definition of the conduct is a personal behavior, way of acting, or bearing of a person. I've not discussed the personal behavior of President William Ruto. I'm only speaking about the office that he holds. So that is quite different, Honorable Speaker, because as as part of my argument...
Senator Methu, I guided you that that issue is dispensed with by the chair.
I am well-guided, Chair.
If you have any other issue beyond that issue, you proceed on so that your minutes can be spent.
Of course, I know why I'm being disrupted, but I'll still say what I want to say, Honorable Speaker, that we cannot keep saying, we borrow because we don't have enough. The reason why we keep borrowing is because we, as a country, assume that we don't have enough. But tell me, Honorable Speaker, and then now I am on the narrow path of not mentioning anybody. Tell me, Honorable Speaker, how a country which borrows money because we don't have money would have enough and a surplus to give students 1 million chapatis in a day, which, if you were to just give them a price, for example, of 20 shillings a chapati, that would make it 20 million a day. In a week, if they are to go to school for 5 days, that would make it 100 million a week. If they were to be there for a month, that would make it 400 million a month. If you are then to take it to a year, it would be 1.2 billion in a year, if that is correct. So, Honorable Speaker, if we have this kind of money, Honorable Speaker, why are we borrowing? What justification do we have, Honorable Speaker, to continue borrowing when we are planting the same resource, Honorable Speaker. The people of Kenya would want to feel, they would want to see what this money, because you see, borrowing is the easier thing, but the bigger responsibility and the bigger burden is on repayment, Honorable Speaker. The repayment is on the people of Kenya. It is not President William Ruto or anybody or any of us who is in government who repays this money, who repays these loans, Honorable Speaker. The burden of repayment of our national debt is specifically on the shoulders of the people of Kenya. We cannot spend money just anyhow, Honorable Speaker, and then we expect the people of Kenya to continue clapping for us. When we are using, the state is using millions of money to go and mock its own citizens, Honorable Speaker, because a person in a village in Migori will see SUVs in their hundreds, Honorable Speaker, SUVs of the state. I'm not on any person. SUVs of the state, Honorable Speaker, just to go and launch one small project, Honorable Speaker. I think we are mocking the people of Kenya. This is not what the people of Kenya expected from the leadership and from the regime that is ruling us now, Honorable Speaker. I don't want to say anything more than that. I know what that consultation will emanate to, or how it will end up. And before I am rudely interrupted, let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Methu. We have no further interventions from the senators, so I will request Senator Tabitha Mutinda to now reply. Senator Methu, you have to stop confusing the whole House with your presence, with your huge presence. Proceed. Maybe. Proceed, Senator Tabitha.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I can see we are really behind time. I hope you'll be able to just give me extra 2 minutes.
That's granted.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, because I don't want really to repeat myself so much. I want to really appreciate all colleagues that have been able to contribute to the medium-term strategy that as a committee we've really been able to embark on. I really want to thank my colleagues, starting with my chair, then my very good friend, Senator Eddie, for very high commitment, Madam Speaker, and the rest of my colleagues as well. Just to mention a few things, Madam Speaker. You know, as a country, where we go wrong at times is just politicizing everything. The matter before us, Madam Speaker, is a very critical issue. Medium-term debt, a matter that every year as a House we prosecute, Madam Speaker. And it is so sad at times when we don't see the bigger picture. These issues of debt are not just personal issues, but are issues that are going to affect our future generation if as leaders we do not address. When I hear colleagues questioning, and it is in their right to question when it comes to expenditure. But Madam Speaker, let us tell each other the truth. The truth is that one of our key responsibilities is oversight. And that mandate of oversight is within us as members of parliament. The National Assembly that oversights the national government, and the Senate that oversights the counties. When we talk about these debts that are in place, it is our responsibility to be able to get the audit reports, analyze the audit reports, and give correct recommendation. Mwananchi has vested that mandate to us, and it is us to ensure that when it comes to matters of public debt, the other time the president did propose a committee that due to politics it was rejected. But I'm happy with the Ministry of Finance has taken up and is ensuring that the Auditor General is able to give this House, both houses of Parliament, a report on the level of debts, where we are with the debts, the repayment, the duration, and also when you look at where we are at currently, we are at 65% from the PFM Act mandate of 55% of the GDP, Madam Speaker. And these are concerns that are all for us. It should not be just deviated to individuals, then we lose the focus on how, as a House, we should play our role. We should be focusing on ensuring that the Ministry of Finance does show these houses that how it's going to ensure that it comes from the 65% and reduce it to the 55%, which is within the PFM Act, Madam Speaker, because that is what is currently in law, Madam Speaker. As a House, as a committee, we had made recommendations, especially when it comes to the system, the IFMI system. It should be a system that is able to ensure all debts are paid, like the pending bills are paid within the recommended time. We talked as a committee and said that the consolidated fund, Madam Speaker, by 31st of May 2025, any debt should be should automatically be paid using the consolidated fund, among many other, Madam Speaker. But because time does not allow, I also want to appreciate all the stakeholders, the Secretariat that have been able to support us. And with those many and few remarks, Madam Speaker, I beg to reply. And I do request that at this point, because we don't have numbers, I request you put the question tomorrow as per Standing Order 66.3. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Senator. And the putting of the question is deferred to the next sitting of this House, which is tomorrow. Honorable Senators, it's now 6:43, and having concluded the business for which I extended the hours of sitting, pursuant to Standing Order 34.2A, the Senate stands adjourned until later, that's tomorrow,